Hello. So welcome everybody. Today we have a really special guest for you. Today I am going to be talking to Dr. Gary Chapman. So I'm just going to give you an introduction to Gary if you've never heard of him. And I'm going to read because honestly his credentials are pretty impressive. So Dr. Gary Chapman is probably most known for the book of 5 Love Languages. So he is a best-selling author and continues to help couples speak each other's love languages. So written more than 20 decades ago and with more than 20 million copies in print. Just going to say that again, 20 million copies in print, which is actually staggering. The 5 Love Languages continues to help strengthen marriages around the world as couples learn to communicate better and speak each other's love languages. So Dr. Gary Chapman is the Director of Marriage and Family Life Consultants, Inc. And he travels the world presenting seminars, and his radio programs have aired more than on 350 stations. And for more information, you can visit www.5lovelanguages.com. But I also know, Gary, you've appeared on Oprah Winfrey, and you've been in the New York Times, Times Magazine, and you've been invited as a guest speaker at the Pentagon on several occasions, which I could probably just talk to you about that for a long time. But so Dr. Chapman holds a BA, MA degrees in anthropology, degrees from Southern West Baptist Theological Seminary, and lives in North Carolina with his wife, where he served as a senior associate pastor at Calvary Baptist Church for more than 50 years. So I feel like I'm just talking to someone who is incredibly knowledgeable and successful. And I feel really privileged to get to talk to you today, Gary. Thank you for joining me. I was introduced to the 5 Love Languages by my parents about 20 years ago. I remember it. And it's always been in the back of my mind. And I've recommended, even now, sort of all these years on, I still recommend your book. And I say, oh, have you heard about the 5 Love Languages? And, you know, whether they're friends of faith or non-faith. And I never thought I'd end up actually talking to you about it. So this is wonderful. And I get to ask you some questions today. And I'm going to just lead us through a bit of an introduction to the 5 Love Languages. And then we're going to just look a bit about your writing journey. We have a creative network here in the UK, and lots of our network are writers. So we've got some questions that have come in from them. And then at the end, we're just going to touch on how kind of faith has influenced that. So yes, thank you for joining. Firstly, where are you talking to us from today?
Well, today I'm in London. Normally I'm in North Carolina, but today I'm in London, Josie, and I'm glad to be with you.
Oh, what are you doing in London?
Well, we're speaking tour this week and next week a little bit, and doing things like this with you, and just trying to share the word about the love languages and other books that I've written. So very excited. And incidentally, the weather's been really nice since we got here. That's exciting.
Well, just a couple of days ago, we had the most random hailstorm and snow here in the Midlands, and it was like it was crazy. So I'm glad the weather's nice. Were you here for the coronation? Did you get that?
I was not here for that, but I watched it on TV back in the States. We were up early that morning getting ready to go to Chicago because our grandson was graduating from Wheaton College. So we saw the coronation. I was very, very impressed with the Christian element of that. It was very, very strong.
Yes, it was. And we do pomp and ceremony very good here in the UK. You mentioned your other books. I'm impressed. How many other books have you written? I know from research there's quite a few.
Well, they tell me that I've written 60 books.
See, when someone has to tell you how many you've written. But you're most well known for the 5 Love Languages. So could you just, it's based on a simple concept of the 5 Love Languages, which is quality time, words of affirmation, gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. Could you just give us an introduction to the 5 Love Languages?
Yes, you mentioned the 5, but what I discovered in my counseling is that what makes one person feel loved doesn't make another person feel loved. And so we have to learn how to communicate love in a way that's meaningful to the other person if we're going to meet that deep emotional need that all of us have for love. So one of them is, and there's no particular order in these in terms of importance, but one is words of affirmation. You look nice in that outfit. I really like your glasses. You know,
I feel loved already. I don't know whether you were telling me that.
Positive comments to another person. And, you know, there's always something good you can say about a person. And there's an ancient Hebrew proverb that says life and death is in the tongue. So, you know, we speak words of affirmation, we're giving people life. And we speak critical words and harsh words, and we're giving them death. Yeah. So words of affirmation is one way to express love. Another is acts of service, doing something for the other person that you know they would like for you to do. In a marriage, there would be such things as cooking meals, washing dishes, mowing grass, walking the dog, changing the baby's diaper. Ooh, that's a big one.
Yes.
You know, there's an old saying, actions speak louder than words. Yeah. Well, if this is your love language, actions will speak louder than words. And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. You know, you mentioned that I have an undergrad and a master's degree in cultural anthropology. We've never discovered a culture anywhere in the world where gift giving is not an expression of love. Mm. The gift says, they were thinking about me. Look what they got for me. Yeah. And the gift doesn't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts. But I remind people, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head, okay? Yeah. And then there's quality time. Giving the other person your undivided attention. I do not mean sitting in front of the TV, watching TV together. That's not quality time. Someone else has your attention. I'm talking about the TV is off, the computer's down. We're not answering our phone. We're giving each other our undivided attention. And it doesn't always have to be in conversation. Sometimes it's doing something with the other person that you know they would like for you to do, but you're giving your full attention to being with them in whatever that project might be. And then there's physical touch. We've long known the power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies, hold them and cuddle them and kiss them. And long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. So the basic concept is that out of the 5 love languages, each of us has a primary love language. And if you don't speak our primary language, we will not feel loved, even though you're speaking some of the other languages. So you can be sincere in expressing love, and the other person still not get it emotionally if you don't understand their primary love language.
So I know one of my husband's love language is touch. He loves touch. It's not necessarily something that I would say my primary love language. I love words of affirmation, and I love doing acts of service for people. But just knowing that people have differences is hugely freeing. And it kind of, that explains so much. And so even, I mean, you were very eloquent in explaining in just a very short time what the differences are. But I think for me, the biggest key is just knowing that there are differences. And that just opens you up to, so we can learn what's different and understand why somebody hasn't felt loved, was to somebody else, that's the most amazing thing that's ever happened to them. Yeah. So could you give an example of a dialect? You gave some examples in there anyway, but an example of how that would play out.
Yeah, I use the word dialect because the concept of spoken language, all of us grew up speaking a language with a dialect. I speak English with a Southern U.S. dialect. You speak English with a different dialect. It's our native tongue. That's the one we understand best. Yeah. And so just as there are dialects in speaking a language, there are dialects in speaking love. For example, acts of service. There's many kind of things. It could be, as I said, it could be washing dishes. It could be vacuuming floors. It could be washing a car. In a work situation, it can be helping somebody at work with a computer problem. They don't know how it, and you know more than they do, and you're helping them. So it's anything that enriches the life of the other person. And I think there are many dialects in every one of these. For example, in words, there are positive words in terms of affirming them for something about the way they look. It's affirming them for a personality trait. It's saying, one of the things I just really like about you, you have such a positive attitude. Sometimes I encounter people and you share an idea and they say, well, that won't work, but
we've all been there.
Yeah, but you always say, well, let's give it a try. And I really appreciate that about you. Or it can be a character trait. That's to say, one of the things I really appreciate about you is your integrity. I know that if you share something with me, I can trust that it's true. So there's many dialects in each of these languages, but if you don't speak the language, whatever dialect, they will not feel loved.
And can you learn this then? Is this something that we're just stuck with and we have to learn to live with the differences, or can we learn to speak somebody's language?
Well, I've had men say in particular, Dr. Chapman, how can you talk your wife into changing her love language?
Yes. We all want the other person to change.
Yeah, that's a selfish statement.
Yeah.
Make it easier on me, okay? Yeah, if we grew up and we didn't receive some of these languages, for example, if you never received positive words growing up, and now you're married to someone and positive words is their love language, there's a learning curve. But the good news is you can learn to speak any of these languages, even if you did not receive them as you grew up as a child. That's the good news, but it does take effort. But listen, love always requires effort. Love is the concept is sacrifice for the other person. In fact, Jesus said, you love each other the way I love you. But what did he do for us? He gave his life for us. So we have that attitude of love. Then we are willing to take the effort to learn to express love in the other person's language.
So many words of wisdom in that. I feel like it's just like I could sit at your feet and listen all day long. So I'm particularly interested if there was a correlation between kind of a creativity and a particular love language, or does it not really work like that?
Well, I think it takes creativity. For example, take gifts. Well, you need to know enough about the person to know what type of gift that they would appreciate. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you can buy them something and give it to them, and it's not something they had any interest in at all, so it just kind of goes in a drawer somewhere. That's why I say if your spouse language is gifts, make a list of things that you hear them say. They're looking through a catalog and they say, man, that's nice. I'd like to have one of those someday. Or they see an ad on TV and say, that would be nice to have. Make a note of all those things. Now you have a list of the kind of things that they would genuinely appreciate. And so the gift means more when you've used your creativity to do something or buy something or make something that you're going to give them.
I finally got the message. I think after my husband would say, oh, I love it when you make me a cup of tea. And I finally realized he really loves it when I make him a cup of tea. and I don't, it's not something I often, even made for myself. So it was like, actually, when I finally clocked, I thought, just need to make him cups of tea. And that's part of his appreciation of receiving love. I wanted to just switch it up ever so slightly now, because we have an audience of creatives, and I mentioned earlier lots of writers. And I was just intrigued as a writer, as an author of 60 plus books, and someone who speaks about their work a lot. What was your journey into writing, and has your approach changed over the years?
Well, to be honest, I never aspired to be a writer. In the early years of my life, it never crossed my mind that I would be an author. But as I got into ministry and working on the church staff and leading workshops on marriage, and then counseling people individually through the years, I realized that a lot of what I was discovering in the process of counseling other people would help other people if I could put it in writing, and write it in a language that people could understand. You know, many people have no concept of psychological terms and they don't know what all that means. So I try to write where the common person can understand the concept, whatever I'm writing on. But all of my writing really has grown out of my experience in counseling people in marriage and family. Because, you know, there's certain things you learn over the period of time that really, really help people. And if you can put them in writing, you have the possibility of touching the lives of many, many people whom you would never, ever be able to do that in your office. So it's a way of expanding your ministry and influencing other people in a positive way. So that's what began to motivate me to do that. My first book, actually, for example, grew out of the college ministry at our church. And every 3 months or every year, I would take 3 months and teach a class on preparation for marriage. And so I wrote my first book based on that, you know. And then the second book, I was dealing with people that were going through separation and divorce. And my second book dealt with that, you know, the reality. And the third book actually was the 5 love languages. So I think the writing needs to be an overflow of what we're learning in our lives, rather than just writing about something in an abstract sense, you know. At least that's true for me.
Well, and then you said about it gives you the potential to reach many more people. I think 20 million copies in print is proof of that. I was just intrigued when you said, you know, you never aspired to be an author. Does that then, did at any point you kind of have a sense of imposter syndrome? So we often talk as creatives about feeling like maybe, you know, we've stumbled into it, or we weren't necessarily trained in this, and we don't have that certificate that says we're a writer or we're a designer, but we've developed and honed those skills ourselves. But then further down the line, you can get that, well, I'm not a real writer, I'm not a real designer, I'm not a real artist. I'm just curious to know if that was ever something or a situation you found yourself in.
Well, from the very beginning, my wife edited all of my books. She was an English major in college. And so I would ask her to edit every one of my books. And she corrected a lot of things in the early years. Now I've gotten better. Her job's not as hard now as it used to be because I've learned some of the things that she taught me along the way in terms of sentence structure and everything. So to me, that was an excellent help. You know, otherwise, the publisher would have to do all the editing. My publisher has said to me, your manuscripts are the cleanest we ever receive. And I say, there's a reason for that. Her name is Carolyn.
Wives are brilliant. Just putting that out there.
Yes, yes. So I think that was an asset, you know, for me in terms of you know, the skill of writing. Because as I said, I did not major in writing or even think about writing. So having someone like that that could up front, you know, help me in that process was very, very helpful.
That's really interesting to hear, because I think a lot of people who maybe are early on in their writing careers, they can feel that actually they can speak from the overflow and all the practicalities of the structure and the composition. They can work on that and develop and grow as they move on, as artists develop and as designers develop, and we all develop in our craft. Did you ever have kind of writer's block in that process? Do you say, you know, you teach a course for 3 months and then write a book? Did you find any disconnection between when you were teaching to actually then getting pen to paper or keyboard typing, that where it was hard to actually get the flow out from yourself?
You know, Josie, I have to be honest, I don't think I ever experienced writer's block. I talked to other writers who talked about that, you know, it's just not coming, you know. But I think perhaps that's because I never write about something until I've had a lot of experience in it, you know. And I have, like in the love languages. The love languages is probably the easiest book I've ever written, because I had discovered it in counseling. I had been using it for at least 5 years in my counseling and in my teaching before I ever wrote the book. And I had all these stories in my mind, illustrations in my mind already. So I think that may be why, I didn't experience what is normally called writer's block.
Yeah.
And again, I never put myself under pressure that I have to have something done by a certain time. Now, I know when we sign contracts, there's a date that it has to be in, but typically I don't sign a contract until I finished about 2/3 of the book. Because I don't want to get in a situation where I've got to push and push and push myself to get it done by a certain date. And then it comes out and it's not really what it needs to be.
Yeah.
I would much rather just take my time and process it on my own schedule, not put myself under pressure, and then sign a contract once I've got it almost completed. Now that doesn't work for every writer. I understand that, and sometimes the editors may not like that, the publishers, but I don't mind accepting a date as long as I've got most of it already written. Okay.
Yeah. and I think the key was, you said you're writing out of the overflow, so you're already full of the information and what you need to get out. I know some people, deadlines make them produce the work, and so
that's right.
It's finding what works best for you. I'm curious, but one of the questions is, what does that look like? Do you go away to write? Do you have a space in your home where you write? Can you write anywhere? Do you sit in a busy coffee shop? Is there a particular environment you find that's more conducive to when you do need to write?
Yeah, well, I've worked full-time on a church staff as an associate pastor all these times. So I've had responsibilities, a full-time job. What I have always done for many, many years is to take Thursday as a writing day, morning and afternoon, not the evening. Morning and afternoon is about all I can handle, and I say to my assistant, now, if there's an emergency, call me. I'll drop everything and come, But otherwise, I've got that one day every week that I'm writing. Now, it takes longer to write something, when you do that, but eventually you get it done. And you also have time to reflect each week on what you have already written. So that's been my pattern. And in the beginning days, I just worked on a little card table in the basement of our house. But several years ago, I was sitting on the deck of my house looking across the creek, and there was a little house over there. And I said to my wife, if that house ever comes up for sale, I'd like to buy it as a writing house. And 2 weeks later, there was a for sale sign in the front of the house.
I think God was listening.
So I went over and knocked on the door, and turned out it was a couple that was in our church, and they were moving in retirement to somewhere else. And I said, well, I'm really interested. And it was a little 2-bedroom house. And so I asked them, I said, what are you going to do with your furniture? And they said, well, we're not going to need it, so I guess we'll sell it. I said, well, why don't you tell me what you think it would be worth, and maybe I'll just buy the furniture too. So it was really easy. And so from that house, I do my radio programs. I have a weekly radio program, an hour long, and I have a daily 1-minute program. And I do my writing from there. So that's kind of my schedule, and that's kind of the space that I've worked in for many years now.
So I love that you had a full-time job whilst you were writing, and you talked about all the responsibilities that come with that. I think, again, that's really helpful to hear, because a lot of writers have books in them, but they have their bread and butter, their day-to-day job, which might not always fit into that writing schedule. But to know that you can write while still having the normal grind of your work and your calling, I think that's a really comforting and reassuring thing to hear, because often people think of this very romantic, you lock yourself in a mountain hideaway for 6 months and then you turn out a book. But actually, you can write in the day-to-day sort of throes of life, but actually that can inform your writing as well. You talked about them being able to process in between, and I think many of our writing audience will find a lot of kind of will identify with that.
I think every writer has to find their own thing that works for them. What you said is exactly right. There are people who can go away to a mountain cabin and write a book in 3 weeks. I could never do that. My job didn't allow that. And I don't know if I could do that even if I had the time. because it just works better for me to do it over time and have time to reflect on what I've already written and where I'm going. But I think we have to find our own way because we're all unique. The important thing about writing, in my mind, is you've got something to say. Yeah. That's worthwhile. That's going to help people. You're not just writing for the sake of writing. You're writing with a goal that what you're putting, on paper is going to eventually help people in some way, whether it's physical or mental or relational, spiritual. But you're writing because you want to help people.
And I definitely get that talking to you, that the whole purpose is to help people in their relationships, their marriages, and I think that's what the success has been, because it's for people and they need to hear it and it helps and works. I'm just curious, as you've gotten maybe over the years busier, more recognition, obviously you're doing the radio shows, and have you had to protect that kind of creative writing time? How have you done that? Have you had to fight for it, or has it always been easy?
Well, I think it's been pretty easy, really, for me, because it just is a part of my life. It was just what I do on that particular day. And consequently, I don't get under a burden of writing because I'm not writing every day, trying to get it out. Again, if a person doesn't have another job, then writing is full time, and you write every day, I assume. But it's just never been that way for me. And I've never felt a real burden in writing. It's just that I'm writing as it comes to me, and writing little by little, and eventually I get to the end of it. So to me, that's what's worked. And I think everybody has to find what works for them.
Yeah. And I'm intrigued as well, just kind of, I wanted to switch more of how faith has influenced your journey. Now, obviously you are really well educated, you have your degrees, and you're the anthropology, and so that has informed your writing and your knowledge and your understanding of human behavior. But do you ever feel like that, we often talk of maybe a download from heaven, God's putting words into your mouth to write on that page? Do you feel that the Holy Spirit is writing with you as you're writing, or not at all?
Short answer is yes.
We want a longer answer, but
to be very honest with you, I never write without saying, God, I can't do this without you. I'm asking you for wisdom as I write. Bring to my mind things that need to be said in this chapter. I can't do it without you. And yes, as I'm writing, things come to my mind that I hadn't thought about before. Incidentally, I do the same thing in my counseling. I'm listening to the people share their problems, share their struggles, and inside, silently, I'm saying, God, give me wisdom. I don't know everything that needs to be said here. Give me wisdom. And God has brought to my mind ideas, next steps for them that I hadn't thought about when I sat down there at the beginning of the time. So, yeah, I'm strongly dependent upon God, and I realize that without God, well, Jesus said it, without God, without me, you can do nothing. We can't even, we wouldn't even be alive without God. He gives us breath every day. So, my reliance on God is really heavy, because I know, as I said, I didn't see myself as a writer. I still don't necessarily see myself as a
even
writer.
after 60 books.
Yeah, but I think for those of us who are Christians, our reliance on God, whatever our vocation, whatever we're doing, we need to recognize it's not us, otherwise we take all the glory, for something, and it's not us, it's God. And if we rely on him, we're going to have the benefit, because the scriptures say, if you lack wisdom, ask, and God will give it to you.
I know for myself, I'm a designer. My creative expression is a problem solving for my clients. And I know when I say, Holy Spirit, just give me inspiration, those ideas come much quicker and better than when I just try to work at it. Mainly because I've forgotten to include God in the process, although I know he's with me. But when I just surrender it to him and just take the pressure off myself, it doesn't deny the hard work, and I still have to hone the skill, but definitely we're nothing without God.
Yeah,
What piece of advice would you either give your younger self, or somebody else starting out in, maybe they've got an idea for a book, but they're not sure of the next step, or even to approach a publisher? What would you recommend? What advice would you give to them?
Well, let me take the last part first and say, don't be discouraged if you've written a book. The first book I wrote was turned down by 4 publishing companies before I found the publisher that was willing to publish it. So don't.
And I bet they're glad they did now.
Oh, but no, what I typically do in the writing, this is just my way of thinking. Whatever topic I've decided to write on, I just make a list, not necessarily chapter titles, but the ideas that would be in each chapter. You kind of lay it out in a way that seems to make sense to me. And then I've kind of got a track to run on. I might change, some orders along the way, but I've at least got a track to run on. But I think it all begins with a passion to communicate something that you have found to be helpful to you and to others. And so you're just trying to expand that concept to touch other lives that would help them as much as it helped you. Yeah. So to me, when we're writing out of the overflow, it's much easier to write than trying to just academically think of ideas and things to write about. Now I know that obviously there are academic writers and that they have to deal with that, those abstract concepts and things. But I think for me at least, it's letting the writing be an overflow of what's happened in my life and what's happened in my ministry to other people.
Wonderful. And I one of the questions that came in was, do you have any more creative projects in the pipeline? Or do you not plan? It's the overflow. Are there any more things overflowing out of you?
Well, there's always something in my mind. And I should say this too. A number of my books, I've had a co-author with me. And often that co-author was the one who shared the idea. For example, Ron Deal came to me with the idea. He has worked with blended families for 25 years. And he said, Gary, would you be open to the possibility of our writing a book together on how the love languages works in a blended family?
Wow.
Because the dynamics are different, between a step parent and a stepchild than a biological parent and a biological child, because you don't have that emotional connection with them. So how do you, even if you know their love language, let's say the child's love language is physical touch, and you say, I got this mate, I'm just going to hug them. Well, they might push you away, but they don't know you yet, and so we have to start with fist bumps, little pats on the back, and kind of work our way up to hugging.
Yeah.
And so when he came to me, and I knew him, I knew the ministry he had had for 25 years, and I thought, this is the person that I would like to write this book with. And so that again is a different dynamic when two people are writing a book. I learned at the first time I did a co-author, I learned how not to do it. And that what we did was we took the chapter outline. He wrote a rough draft. I wrote a rough draft, and we gave them to an editor, and the editor put them together. And I'm reading and thinking, why did they leave that out? That was good. He was thinking the same thing. So we made it through, but I realized that's not the way to write a book together,
Yeah.
So what I do now, if the other person knows more about the subject than I do, but I have an interest in it, I'll let them write the rough draft, and then I come back and work the love languages or whatever into the topic. But if I know more about it, and then they have a keen insight that I know will work, then I write the rough draft and let them work at it, and that works much better.
Yes.
If you ever do a co-authored book, that would be my suggestion.
I think that we learn so much more through failure than when we succeed. And it's that journey, isn't it? And that's part of the creative process. I think when I first heard the phrase, without, failure is part of your success. You actually have to go on that journey. But it sounds like you've done quite a few co-authors, because I know, looking through the books that you've written sort of for the military, and so it feels like you've maybe repackaged for different audiences to be more specific. Is that something that is more of a modern phenomenon, because you may be having to target audiences specifically, or has that just happened organically? How's that happened?
Yeah, it's happened organically. I never thought at the beginning I'm going to write a series of 10 books on the 5 love languages. That never crossed my mind. I wrote it for married couples because that's where I discovered it. I did have a chapter in the first book on how it works with children. But couples came to me and said, Dr. Chapman, we read this in marriage. It's really helpful. We read that chapter on children, but we need more help on how this works with children. So then I teamed up, because I hadn't had a lot of counseling experience with children. I teamed up with Dr. Ross Campbell. He was a psychiatrist who'd spent 30 years working with children. And that's the book I mentioned. That's the way we wrote that first book. We learned from each other on that one. And then parents would come and say, we read your book on children. It really, really helped. But now our children are teenagers. It doesn't seem to be working. What does their love language change? And I said, I don't think the love language changes, but you have to learn new dialects, because what you've been doing seems childish to them. They're teenagers now. So you have to learn new ways of expressing their love.
I think I need to get that book now. I now have 2 teenagers, so I think I need to get the next one.
Yeah. So that's the way the books grew. I wrote one with a lady on how love languages works with a special needs child. Wow. She had a special needs child, and she'd worked in that field for 20 years. So, and it's very different, a special needs child, and how that works. I wrote one with a lady who had lost 2 babies and had worked for 20 years in helping people, respond and get over and work their way through the pain and hurt of losing a baby, and how it helps a husband and wife if they know the love languages, because we grieve different ways. And, sometimes we put each other off, and the husband said, well, you got to get over this girl, rather than being empathetic with her and realizing we grieve different ways. So, the books, and you mentioned the military edition, many military chaplains, because I was speaking on military bases, Gary, you've got to write one for military, with military illustrations, and especially how do we speak these languages when one of us is deployed halfway around the world? And so I teamed up with a lady who was a military wife and let her give me illustrations. And then I talked to a lot of military couples to get illustrations on how to do that. So, the books that came down the line on the 5 love languages really grew out of other people expressing a need for how this works in these particular relationships. And then we took it to work, the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. Wow. Because we discovered, at least in our country, in the US, 70% of the people who have a job say they feel little to no appreciation at work. And 64% of the people that leave a job and go to another job say they left because they didn't feel appreciated. Wow. And so Dr. White, he's a psychologist, a Christian psychologist who had spent 20 years working with business leaders, he said, Gary, I think if we could take the love languages to work, but we'll call them appreciation languages, we could change the climate of the workplace. And I was fascinated with it. And I really sensed, man, yeah, I'm with you on it. So we did research for 2 years to make sure it worked, and helped before we actually wrote the book. But the series has kind of grown out of, felt need on the part of individuals. Yeah.
Wow. Do you know what? It's been an absolute privilege talking with you. And it is abundantly clear that all of this has come from just a servant heart, somebody who has seen things work and wanting to help others. And the church globally is grateful for that. And thank you also for just giving us an insight into your writing process and your creative journey, because again, so many of the writers listening to this will just be able to identify with that, and that will help them, spur them on. Just as we're finishing, can you just tell us how we can follow you, connect with you, or access any of your resources?
Sure, you can always go to the website 5lovelanguages.com. The number 5lovelanguages.com. There are quizzes on there on how to discover your love language, how to discover your apology languages. And they can sign up if they wish to get a weekly email from me. And there's other things there. And pretty much all of my books you'll find described on that website. And of course, all of them are available through Amazon as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gary. I just wish you all the best with all of your tour while you're here in the UK. I hope the weather stays good. Yes, just thank you so much for all of your wisdom, your insight, and your generosity with your time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Josie. It was good chatting with you, and thanks for what you're doing for writers, because we all need encouragement and help, and we can learn from each other.
We do, absolutely.
Thank you, Josie. Good to be with you. Goodbye.
Cheers. Bye.